I mainly studied painting when I was in school, and I didn't really start working with books specifically until after I was out of school. So I studied sculpture and I studied painting, and really thought I would primarily focus on painting while I was in, after school, and it slowly merged into what I do now. I began working with books. I was working on a series of collages, mainly large paintings, and was interested in language and text and this cliche idea of art sort of as a universal language, or the idea of art as any form of communication. And I was, of course, intrigued by the texture of the page itself, sort of that rich texture that you get, and the idea that there's information in there, but it's not necessarily legible at that point. And I was feeling really guilty cutting up books, of course, because you're not supposed to cut books, you're not supposed to destroy them. But it made me think about the book itself as a material to work with. And this was around 2000 when, we began using the internet for most of the information. And I thought it felt really relevant to work with some of the books that we're not using as often as we used to, that we don't rely on now that we do get most of our information online. So it felt really relevant and intriguing, and I began sort of just sealing up the edges of books and carving like rough holes into them. So I'll cut through multiple pages at a time, but I'm only removing each layer at, one at a time. The book can become a landscape. So once I find a book that I want to work with, I decide on a form I want it to take. I often have it as a closed book, and then I seal the edges, or I'll do something like this, where I pull the cover back so that it's sort of not so much the box, basically, of the book. So I use an acrylic varnish on the edges so that it's not glossy, and I really want it to look like the original book as much as possible. And what that does is it creates sort of a skin on the outside of the pages. That way it's solid on the outside, but the pages inside are still independent. It's literally like reading. I'm just going one page or layer at a time, and I'm discovering things as it happens. So it's really improvising in that way. And in that way, it's giving me artistic freedom to work within those confines, but it also allows the book itself to sort of come through, and so it really becomes a real collaboration between me and the existing material. And even though it's a completely subtractive process, there is some push and pull. So sometimes I'll find an image that I think will work well, and but then as I go along further, I realize it doesn't work with the rest of the piece. So sometimes I'll have something and then I'll take from there. I want my work to sort of explore is what we're losing now that things are becoming immaterial. Obviously, books are a material that everybody has a personal history with, and we have a long cultural history with as well. And so the idea of working with a material that everybody knows, but showing that to them in a brand new way, and the fact that a book, in essence, is already sculptural because it is already a three-dimensional material object. And by losing that physicality with our information and with our text, as things become digital, we're also losing that stability, but we're also sort of losing that physical relationship we have with the information, and also that comfort of knowing that when I have a book on a shelf, it will be exactly the same for hundreds of years. But if I have information on text on a computer, I might lose it in 2 years because my computer might crash, or I might have to update the format. It's exciting when all of a sudden something that I didn't expect will emerge. So here this foot just emerged, which is, we were just talking about that. I think this is almost sort of perfect. There's this hand here, and then there's this little foot. So I think I'll use this foot. So once I use the varnish, though, it'll take about, take some time to dry. So I won't want to work on the piece. Because this is loose and I'm afraid I might lose it, I can varnish it in place. I'm sort of painting the edges, really, to solidify. When I started carving into it, I came across this figure right here, just this little head resting on the pillow, and I thought it was sort of an interesting image. And since I came across that image, I decided to choose only sort of forms that came across as abstract. So a lot of these, of course, are medical diagrams and geographic diagrams and architectural and engineering diagrams, but by isolating just certain components of it, it really becomes completely abstract. So I almost thought of everything after this point as being sort of a dream for this figure. Like the rings of a tree, the chronology of a book is usually a linear story, and the beginning of the book is in the beginning of the page, and the end, of course, is at the end. So not only am I carving through space, but I'm carving through time. And very much like a painter might work, I start by, I'm working on the whole thing at one time, but I'm starting with like the larger images and sort of blocking in those larger pictures, and then go into more detail as I go. And so I'm thinking about the composition pictorially, but then also sculpturally. And right now I feel like this is sort of like I want the energy to flow more through, so I might even open this up. I think they do, and I want that to be the case. In a way, I like the idea that I'm sort of cracking open the book. And sometimes there's very obvious connections that are already sort of given within the content, within the structure of the material itself. And so there's very obvious connections, but in a way I like to keep it loose and almost random enough to where the viewer can sort of create their own story. If any type of art is either going to use a material from nature or a material from culture. In a way, I'm definitely recycling the material itself, and it's also sort of a recycling of ideas, so not only when you think of recycling, it's, physically recycling the material, but it's also a recycling of, the images and the texts that other people have created. The material isn't being wasted, but the content itself lives on in a new way as well. I try to live that way as well. Of course, I think that we have a far way to go as far as the way we consume. And I do think about the idea of the parallels between consumption, as far as in our everyday lives, and then consumption of information. And in a way, that's what my work becomes as well. It's not only am I creating something new, but I'm also reading and using this information, which is what happens digitally quite a bit. It's this idea of creation through consumption. So here's a really interesting image. And it has this sort of circle pattern, so I think what I'll do is I'll definitely keep this. So now it's a good time for me to varnish that down. That has a good balance with some of these things over here. So, I like the image itself, but it also, works really well, sort of having a nice composition. I am giving the book, in a way, I hope that I'm giving the book a longer life, but at the same time, I sort of have to kill it. I sort of have to take its function away in order to create something new. So people can, this book specifically probably will live longer, and more people might see some of these images or some of these ideas through my work. But just like in a natural history museum, if there's a taxidermied animal, it has to die in order for it to be preserved. With my work, I'm thinking about the idea of loss, of the book itself, the loss of printed text. I want there to sort of be a beauty within the piece, but also sort of that tension where it feels like things are being erased and things are being lost.